how does the West Asia crisis and Trump's tariff war, what does it mean for global inequality and wealth distribution?
Well, I think this can just push, even faster, the rising inequality trend and the more extractivism, more fossil fuel extraction. So, this is all going in the wrong direction. I mean, the good news, so to speak, is that it's not going to work. I think, US electors are not going to be very happy at the end of the year. And I think world citizens in general realize that, this sort of techno nationalist model, is not preparing the world for, to face the environmental and social challenges that we face. So, in this report, we are trying to develop a sort of counter narrative because we believe, there's a sort of ongoing, cultural, intellectual battle, also political, of course, but it's first, intellectual and cultural battle about what kind of development model do we want? Where do we want to go?
FIs have left India in tropes in recent days because there is this AI play happening in the US. So the rupee Indian currency has depreciated significantly. And now the government is trying to incentivize foreign investors to bring more money into India through tax incentives. Do you think that is the right approach to attract investments?
Anmol, you want to respond to
I
this?
mean, in general, so I think this question of, I think we need to think a bit deeper beyond just thinking that tax systems are the main reason for investors leaving the country. I think there's potentially more deeper structural problems facing the economy. I don't mean just now, but also with the sort of fuel crisis that's looming over us. And I think there are broader questions, and I think relying solely on tax incentives is just taking the easy way out, and that also hurts us in the long run, where we forego important revenue sources at a time when we sort of really need them a lot. So I would think we need to find more creative ways of dealing with the situation.
You want to answer? I mean, is it a good policy way to basically incentivize foreign investors vis-a-vis domestic investors?
No, I don't think this, I don't know enough about the specifics of this scheme, but that doesn't seem like a very promising avenue to me.
Went through a report in detail, and I was also attending the webinar day before yesterday. So the report suggests that India could overtake China around 2060, given certain conditions that, of course, the convergence model goes into. How much of that outcome depends on demographics and how much on policy choices made over the next 2 decades?
I mean, the biggest part, I would say, is economic rather than demographic. Of course, we all know the demographic of China and India, but in the end, what's very important in our scenario for global convergence is that India would, is projected to reach 60,000 euros in PPP euros of today in per capita GDP by the end of the century. So that's 5,000 euros per month in the gross national income per month per capita, and that's our target for India, but that's also our target for all countries by the end of the 21st century. So as a point of comparison, today, the average monthly gross national income ranges from 290 euros in sub-Saharan Africa, around 700 euros in South Asia, and 4,500 euros or even a bit more in North America. So basically, our plan is to say, okay, we can get, India and the global South can get to the level of rich countries today, or even a bit higher, 5,000 versus 4,500. But the global North has to stop growing, basically, because if we want, the question we're asking really in the report is, if we take seriously the aspiration of countries like India to reach the same level of prosperity as the North, which to us is sort of the starting point of our thinking, which we have to take seriously this aspiration. It's not going to go away. People in the North can imagine, a world where it will go away. And, sometimes IPCC report imagine a world where in their scenario, even in their most cooperative, sustainable development scenario, in fact, by 2100, the poorest country in the world in South Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa have only 1/3 of the per capita GDP of Europe. So it's still quite far from full convergence, which of course makes it easier to keep the planet below 2 degrees or 2.5 degrees. But this is not the real world we live in. The real world we live in is one where the aspiration to equal prosperity is not going to go away, and it should not go away. There's no reason it should. So given this starting point, what we try to show is that we can reach 5,000 euro per month for all countries by 2100, including India. But this requires different production systems than the one of the US today. So it will be much less fossil fuel. So you have to go for decarbonization of the energy system. It also involves a shift from immaterial to material sector. So less manufacturing goods and more education and health, which in our scenario will reach nearly 45% of total labor hours in all countries by 2100, and also a change in food habits so as to allow for reforestation. I must say, I don't think this will eat India too much. The problem is more the red meat food habits in North America and to a lesser extent Europe. But I think the current food habit of India, is not targeted here. So it's important to see that it's like when we talk about work time reduction. To begin with, it's mostly an issue for rich countries so as to limit their total material growth. For countries like India, the priority is, of course, to get to more prosperity, to have higher income. Then gradually, as India, catches up with rich countries, we believe that, less working hours can also be good to, spend more time with your friends and family and limit material footprint. But at this stage, the real issue for India is convergence and try to foster convergence.
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, so does it mean that because you are looking at in PPP terms, not
Yes.
in market exchange terms, right? But does it mean, I mean, India is already, I think, third largest in the world in PPP terms, in GDP, in total GDP, if we look at
Yes, but on
US
27th, if we look at it in per capita
per
terms,
capita. So you are saying in per capita terms, India will
yes,
overtake
I mean,
China?
this question is really, when we talk about global convergence, it's very much a concept of per capita income. So every citizen of the world will have 5,000 euros per month. I think it's not, I mean, by total size, there's a lot of other factors, mainly population. But I mean, India's per capita income is very low right now. And it's expected to grow very high and reach the levels of the United States, basically. Every Indian will be roughly at the living standards of someone living in the United States. And that's the kind of vision for
Yes.
convergence we sort of have in mind.
So
So
the
it's
US,
yes, sorry.
so the US living standard now, India will achieve in 2100.
Exactly.
Well, but already by 2060, I don't remember the exact figures. We have them in the report. India will already have converged, have made a long way in this process. So it's 2100 is complete convergence. 2080 is almost complete, and 2060 is already very well advanced. Basically, it requires growth in living standards in India and sub-Saharan Africa in the coming decades, comparable to what we had in East Asia in general between 1950 and 2025, first with Japan and then with China. So it's very fast, and it requires a lot of investment, in construction, hospitals, schools, infrastructure. So it's a lot of construction. So that's taken into account in the plan.
Exactly.
And it's not, we are not trying to restrict the sort of material needs of India, because at the end of the day, again, the plan is to have the same level of per capita GDP for India as for the US today, or actually higher than the US today. And that's the whole challenge of the report, is how to make this possible. And yes, this requires a big change in the energy system, a shift in the share of sectors going from manufacturing to education and health, which we believe is also good for well-being, because having bigger and bigger iPhone is nice, but having a good school and hospital for your children, is even nicer. So it's a question of degree, but we plan a shift from one to the other.
And I just want to add one thing that, I mean, as Toma already mentioned, there is, I mean, it's there in the report. There is a plan that we have. It's not just sort of, castles in the air. I mean, we have this new institution we envision called the Global Justice Fund, which would raise money through global wealth taxes and actually would lead to about, somewhere between 1900 to 1200 euros of per capita dividends every year once we've raised enough money. So, and these would be used to expand health education, to invest in decarbonization of the economy, and to allow for investments in climate adaptation as we go ahead. So I think there's a lot in the plan, and it's all. I mean, the challenge was to find a way to bring very high prosperity everywhere in the world while staying within a 2-degree temperature target. So combining these fairly hard goals together. And how do we do it if we want to achieve this plan? And I think we've spoken about some of the ideas we have there.
As per the report, India has experienced higher inequality but lower productivity growth than China. It's briefly mentioned. What is the cause of this? What has happened?
Well, we believe on the basis of comparative historical evidence like the one you mentioned, but also comparing, all countries from all regions in the world, that, high inequality is not very useful for prosperity. I mean, we are not saying we should have complete equality, but, an income scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, is enough. You don't need 1 to 100, 1 to 200. And when we compare countries over time, what we find is that, the countries which have huge income gaps and wealth gaps, they don't grow faster. In fact, they even tend to grow less fast, because to get growth, you need very inclusive social investment. You need more people who have access to human capital, to education, and you're concentrating decision-making power in a few hands in a very extreme way doesn't really help growth.
And then I just want to add one thing before we'll have to leave, that I think one reason, and this is debatable, but before India and China opened up their economies, China had made sure to invest a lot in their human capital. So literacy rates in China were already fairly high, which allowed a larger share of their population to sort of benefit from whatever, the opening up of the markets. In contrast, in India, as per our last census, there was still a large fraction of the adult population that remained illiterate. And I mean, I think there's enough work, including by Amartya Sen and Jean Drèze, which shows that human capital investments have just been abysmally low compared to even our neighbors in some cases. So I think these all very much contribute to our growth prospects.
But the good news of the report, to summarize, that from a technical viewpoint, from an economic and technical viewpoint, it is possible for a country like India, to reach very high level of prosperity, and still, the entire world would remain, in a reasonable climate situation. And we believe that's important, because many people in the world today are trying to say, basically there will not be enough for everyone. So you have to go to war basically with one another. You have to grab the resources of everybody, because otherwise, you will not be able to survive. Or we have to keep the poor countries poor. That's something you hear a lot in the north, because otherwise, they are going to burn the planet. This is all leading to war and geopolitical tension, because people will not accept to remain poor, and so the good news of the report is that from a technical economic viewpoint, it's actually possible to reach prosperity for all, including for India, within planetary boundaries. And then it's a question of building the political coalition and the political will to get there. We are not saying it's going to be simple, but I think we believe it's in the end it's a matter of political will, and whatever will happen in a country like India, the largest democracy in the world, and very soon the largest country in the world in terms of GDP and population and everything, is going to be key, of course, for this process in the future.